And good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us in this important town hall to discuss all of the hate crimes that have been happening against the Asian community. My name is Harry Budisidharta, and I am the Executive Director of Asian Pacific Development Center, which is a local nonprofit that has been serving the immigrant and refugee communities in Colorado over the past 4 years. Before we begin, I am saddened to report that there has been a mass shooting that happened at a King Soopers in Boulder. It is still an active crime scene right now, and we sincerely hope that everybody is okay. But with your permission, I would like us to take just a brief moment of silence to honor the victims of that terrible mass shooting. And thank you, everybody. I want to thank all of you again for attending this town hall. I am happy to see an outpouring of community support, but I am also saddened that we even have to hold this town hall in the first place. Hate crimes, unfortunately, is not a new issue for our Asian community. After all, the first race riot that happened in Denver happened in 1880 when a mob of white men destroyed Chinatown and hanged one innocent Chinese man. Nobody was ever prosecuted for the murder of the innocent man or for the property destruction. And then in 1982, Vincent Chin was murdered by a group of white men because they thought that he was Japanese and that he was responsible for their job loss and the factory closure in that area. The white men were prosecuted, but only ended up serving 3 years probation and paid $3,000 fine. And most recently in Colorado, in April 2020, a racist entered a liquor store in Denver area, proceeded to cause destruction inside the property, and when he was let out of the building, he proceeded to run over the owner, who is a Sikh man. The racist was also heard screaming, "Go back to your country." Fortunately, the district attorney in that case has agreed to file hate crime charges against that individual. As you can see, this is a complicated issue that has plagued our community for hundreds of years. And if we ever hope to stop it, we have to recognize that hate crime is a systemic issue caused by racist laws, racist policies, and racist rhetoric from our elected officials that are designed to otherize communities of color, to make it seem as if we are not part of the fabric of American society and hence not deserving of that equal protection under the law. Racists get emboldened to attack our community when we had laws like the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 that banned Chinese people from immigrating to the US. Racists get emboldened to attack our community when the federal government rounded up all people of Japanese ancestry during World War II and sent them to internment camp regardless of their citizenship status or whether they have done anything wrong. And racists get emboldened to attack our community when elected officials choose to dehumanize us by using terms like China virus and Kung flu. I want to thank both the Aurora Police and the 18th Judicial District Attorney for being here. I sincerely believe that law enforcement is a critical aspect of fighting against hate crimes, and I sincerely appreciate their support of our community. I also want to emphasize that law enforcement is not the only tool that we have to fight against hate crimes. We have to work together as a community and make sure that our people are not afraid to speak up against hate crimes. We have to work together and make sure that our community history is being taught in local schools. We have to work together and pressure our elected officials, including some in Colorado, to stop using racist and derogatory terms against our community. Today, You will learn a lot of useful information from our law enforcement partners. After today, we will be holding a community rally this Saturday, March 27th at 11 a.m. at the state capitol. Please join us and help us fight for a world where we do not have to worry about hate crimes. I want to end by stating that our community is strong, our community is resilient. We will get through this together with all of your help, and we really appreciate all of you being here. So I'd like to give the floor to Chief Vanessa Wilson.
Okay. Thank you, Harry. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. Thank you so much for having me here today. Like Harry said, I'm Chief of Police for the Aurora Police Department, Vanessa Wilson. And also here on the call with me is Claudine McDonald, who is a newly appointed position that I created. So she deals with all our community relations within the community, and I'm happy to have her here on the call with me, and she may get a chance to introduce herself later. So with that, can I go ahead and next slide, please? Harry, I appreciate you recognizing the active shooter that they're dealing with in Boulder right now, and I thought it was extremely important for us to have a moment of silence for the 8 victims in Atlanta, if we could do that. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. So I want to show a message of support that we created last year when the hateful rhetoric started across the country with the China virus, the Kung flu, all of those things that were extremely disturbing. And we saw an uptick across the nation in the people of AAPI descent being accused of bringing the virus, and obviously hatred towards them for that. So I just want to share a message of support that we put out last year, and we just put it out again last week after the tragedy in Atlanta.
Across the nation, Asian American immigrants and refugee communities have become the target of COVID-19 related xenophobic harassment, intimidation, assaults, and verbal abuse. We will not allow the COVID-19 pandemic to become an instrument of hate, racism, or stereotyping. Working together as a community, we can prevent this from happening, protect one another, and restore confidence in our communities.
As our social distancing restrictions are lifted and our society returns to this new normal, many of you may be feeling vulnerable and afraid. We are here for you. You will see more Aurora police officers patrolling our Asian American, immigrant, and refugee places of worship, businesses, community centers, and organizations. One way you can show support is by supporting their businesses during this trying time.
If you see something, say something. Racial slurs, intimidation, physical assaults, and harassment are a few ways you can be targeted for a hate crime. If you or someone you know is being or has been victimized by any hate crime, it's very important you make a police report by calling 303-627-3100 or 911 when it's happening. Once we complete a report, we'll work with our victim advocates to develop a safety plan that will restore your sense of safety and security.
The Aurora Police Department does not tolerate hate. We will utilize every resource we have towards fully investigating and supporting the prosecution of hate crimes against any group. As a reminder, the Aurora Police Department does not enforce immigration laws, and we will not ask, investigate, or share the immigration status of any victim reporting a hate crime. These investigations, as always, will be a top priority for the Aurora Police Department. As I continue to work with our community leaders to make sure we're doing all that we can to protect you, I implore you to please make a police report if you're a victim of a hate crime, or speak up for those who cannot.
Okay, thank you for that. And also, if you go onto the YouTube, you can share this video, and there is a place where it also translates into different languages. So please utilize that and share often with the people in our community, please. Next slide. So I know that the district attorney is going to go into this in detail about what constitutes a bias-motivated crime, but I have it here for you to read, the Colorado Revised Statutes, but it is a very, it's a very specific set of legislation that we want to know about. Obviously, if people are harassed or treated differently due to their race, color, religion, ancestry, physical or mental disabilities, perceived race or sexual orientation, we need to know about these things, because this person who's committing this crime is not going to do it once. It's most likely going to embolden them, as if they keep getting away with these types of hate speech or acts of hate, to embolden them to continue to harass and intimidate those in our community. Next slide, please. This is just showing you the directive that we have in the Aurora Police Department that directs officers to take a report and to make sure that we are investigating it to its fullest. We have to notify the supervisors right away, and then we take this information after our investigation, and then we will also report it to the FBI that we had a hate or a bias-motivated crime within our community. Next slide. So in 2020, I know that these hate crimes are most likely underreported. I know just specifically with the Aurora Police Department, we've had issues with trust in the community, and we've worked really hard with Harry and others to try and allow people. We're here for them. Nothing like that. And we need to have these reports so that we can put these people into the court system, and so that they either get mandatory mental health issues, if that's what's going on with them, or if they have to be incarcerated or pay some sort of fine, and most importantly, victim restitution once they have hurt someone or damaged their property. In 2020, we had 3 documented incidents, and I'm sure there's many more out there, and I would need to know about it. So I'm hoping that by having this conversation today, that you will feel comfortable in reaching out to us and making sure that we take these reports and that we follow up on every aspect to try to identify a suspect. Next slide. So far in 2020, unfortunately, we have 2 bias-motivated crimes so far. There's just, right now I've got on the slide here just a report of what that was. One was an aggravated assault, so they did turn violent. There was a robbery where they assaulted the individuals. There was a African-American male and a Hispanic female, and during the assault, they made racial slurs towards them about having a mixed relationship. And then the other was a racist language to a clerk of Israeli heritage. So to some people, they may say, why would I call the police on this? It's verbal, or you know, they took my property, but no other thing happened to me. It's still very, very important. Like I said, these people will be emboldened and they will continue these acts unless we know about them, and then we can stop them. Next slide. And so I know we're giving definitions and we're talking about what a bias-motivated crime is, but it's really if you feel as though you've been victimized, if you feel as though your race or your heritage has been used in a way that you're being targeted because of that, please call us. We'll figure it out. We will dig into it and find out if it meets the reporting requirements. But even if it doesn't, I think it's important to get individuals on our radar when things like this happen. So please, I need you to report that. The number here, the non-emergency line, 303-627-3100 is here. And also, if it's happening, it's in progress, I need you to call 911. And we will either send an officer to your location, or say you live in Aurora and had gone to work, we will make sure that we get an officer to call you on the phone. And then, of course, interpreters are available at no cost, and we will find the appropriate language to communicate. Next slide. So we have a very vibrant victim advocates program. And again, we have victim advocates from a very diverse set of community members, as well as they can help us find the exact dialect or language that we need to present to talk to you and communicate. Next slide. Okay, Claudine.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Claudine McDonald. I am the Community Relations, Chief of Community Relations for the Aurora Police Department, the newly appointed position that Chief Wilson just spoke of. And just wanted to briefly share some information with you about the activities that we are responsible for and some of the activities that we're moving forward in relation to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So up on the screen, you'll see the 5 areas of responsibility. They include recruiting for youth, community engagement. We have community relations officers in this section as well. And then the diversity, equity, and inclusion component. One of the most important aspects that I wanted to point out for this evening is specifically a new way that Chief Wilson has implemented for the Aurora Police Department. One specific section that is most important to me right now is a new way of service, where it's stated, and I pulled it directly from the content from there. It says implicit and unconscious bias and cultural competency training. So I just wanted to share that we have started the training for our entire department. We have 742 sworn officers, and each one of them have gone through an implicit bias training at the beginning of this year. And also we are going to continue the training with different modules. And there's a reason for this, because if you read at the bottom, the Aurora Police Department understands that there may be many historical traumas that could prevent our community from reporting bias crimes. And we are training our staff to better understand what those are. And we strongly encourage our community to reach out if they experience a crime they believe to be racially motivated. So this is really important to myself as someone who identifies as a Pacific Islander and who has a historical background of understanding what those traumas could be to a community, and then also translating that into the work that we do with our sworn officers. And Chief, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Claudine. Sorry, I'm just having a few technical difficulties here, and we even practiced this prior to coming online, so I apologize to everyone. Again, if you'd like to be involved, we have a very vibrant volunteer program. If you'd like to become one of our interpreters, we would love to have you as well, and we are just going to do everything we possibly can to make sure that we're connecting in the community and making sure everyone feels safe and safe to also report.
All right, I think it's my turn. First of all, I just want to say thank you, Harry, for helping put this together. Chief Wilson, thank you for allowing us to join in and be a part of this. And thank you, everybody who's joined in today, over 200 people. I think that speaks volumes about how much this community cares about one another and how much people care about this topic, especially in light of the horrendous killings in Atlanta. So I would like my message as the district attorney for the 18th Judicial District. If you take anything away from this today, I want you to know this, that the district attorney's office stands with our friends in the Asian community, and that we stand with you against hatred of any kind, that we are prepared and ready to seek justice for victims of bias motivated crimes, and that in this district, I absolutely will not tolerate that. We will take it extremely seriously with the gravity that those kinds of crimes and cases deserve. So to that end, I would simply echo what Chief Wilson was saying about the importance of reporting those kinds of crimes. Obviously, as a prosecutor, having been doing this for a long time now, we cannot prosecute what is not reported, and we certainly can't prosecute what's not investigated. And what I think, from personal experience, having observed the justice system for a long time and having seen bias motivated crimes occur in this community, it's that these words, though sometimes it may just sound like, hateful rhetoric. Sometimes it may just sound like, somebody who doesn't care about their neighbor, doesn't care about how they're perceived by their community. We do not want to see those words turn into criminal action. So report it, please. let us know and let us help. So that everybody knows kind of where we're at in terms of numbers of bias motivated crimes in the district. On average, over the last 5-6 years, we have prosecuted, filed charges on about 30 bias motivated crimes every single year. And that's especially important in the 18th Judicial District because I am responsible as a district attorney for seeking justice for the largest Asian community in the state of Colorado. And that's not just Arapahoe County, that includes the rest of the 18th as well. So Arapahoe, Douglas, Elbert, and Lincoln counties combined. And I take that very seriously. So about 30 cases per year that we file, that we seek charges on, and that we ultimately resolve through trial or a plea agreement. In 2019, that number was actually down. It was down in a good way. It was down at 22, and that spiked again in 2020 to 33. So that's a pretty hefty increase in percentages, and one I do not want to see repeated in 2021. Right now in the 18th Judicial District, we actually have 33 open bias motivated crime cases, and that's higher than you would normally see. But that's also partly due to the pandemic and the backlog of cases because our trial system has been largely shut down due to the pandemic, obviously out of concern of not trying to spread the virus in close quarters like a courthouse. Fortunately, the courthouses have now reopened safely, and we're starting to pick back up these cases. And I say it's a backlog because we take them so seriously that oftentimes they result in actually going to trial. In fact, just last week, one of our very first trials that we had in reopening the judicial district was a bias motivated crime. And it was really impactful to talk to my prosecutor who handled that case, to hear from the jurors who came in and heard the evidence, who said, "We thank you for bringing this forward. We appreciate the fact that you take this seriously." And so I hope everybody who's listening in on this call, hears that and takes it in, because this community cares. This community wants those cases to come forward and be taken seriously. So a couple weeks ago, actually, in my office, I wanted to talk about a new initiative. I started a bias motivated crime team. So basically a team of prosecutors who are especially dedicated to handling bias motivated crimes. And I did that for a very particular reason. So very few prosecutors in the state of Colorado actually train and teach on how to handle these kinds of cases. In late 2019, myself, the Boulder District Attorney, the Colorado District Attorney's Council, the ADL, we joined together and actually put on a training in which I participated to teach other prosecutors about how to handle these things. Because what we know is that one bias motivated crime, it impacts that one victim, but that's not just it. And it's not just that victim's family that gets impacted. It's oftentimes, with these kinds of cases, a whole community. And so I wanted to emphasize how important these cases were by starting this bias motivated crime team. And we've taken this approach with some other kinds of specialized prosecutions in the past, things like vehicular assaults. We have a specialized team. And the whole point behind that is to get these folks special training not just in the law, but in cultural sensitivity and reaching out to communities to teach about what we're doing to help educate on this process, to hopefully engender that trust and goodwill so that folks will come forward and that we can build upon that trust. We can build upon seeking justice in the courtroom where people feel like they're seeing justice done. I think it's really important that folks understand the general process as a case starts, especially if it's a bias motivated crime. So obviously I have a team, and I should tell you, when I solicited volunteers for the bias motivated crime team, and this is fantastic because it's an added duty. All our prosecutors already have a full caseload, but we were overwhelmed by the interest of people within the office who wanted to join this important effort. So once we get a bias-motivated crime case into our office from the police department, my office has dedicated investigators who oftentimes follow up on the issues that are important for us in a trial. We establish relationships early on with the victims, with their families, with their support systems, so they understand really what's going to happen. What are the next steps in court? Because it is oftentimes a painfully slow process. We also have an incredible team of victim advocates in the district attorney's office. Victim advocates that, again, are trained in cultural sensitivity, victim advocates that are there to support and explain the process to people as we go through it, so that, you know, I might be in court on any given day, but if somebody needs to reach out as a victim of crime and want to talk to somebody in my office, that victim advocate is there for you. And then we will get on that phone call with them just as soon as we possibly can. These people are incredibly dedicated professionals who are passionate about being there for victims. So if anybody on this town hall, if anybody in this conversation knows somebody who's been victimized and has been wondering, should I report this? Should I come forward? I would urge you to tell them that there are so many people here that care and that want to help. So the next thing I'm going to do, folks, I wanted to introduce you all to Brian Sugioka. Brian Sugioka is a chief deputy district attorney in my office. He is a 20-year prosecutor. I first met Brian when I started in the DA's office back in 2013. And Brian's in a very important position in my administration in this office. He is in charge of the county court team, the entire county court, which is all the misdemeanor prosecutors in Arapahoe County. He's responsible for training them, for supervising them, and oftentimes helping them on bias-motivated crime teams. That's an incredibly important job, because the training aspect of what we do at the youngest age of district attorneys helps mold them into the people who will handle those felony cases, the more even serious and extreme bias-motivated crimes. So I just want to turn it over to Brian now. Thanks, Brian, for being on. If you could walk us through some of the bias-motivated crime statutes and kick off that conversation, I'd appreciate it.
I will, absolutely. Thank you, John. Thank you, Chief Wilson, and everyone else who participated here. In preparation for my part of this discussion, I thought a little bit about sort of my own history and my own background. In a very real way, I am here in Colorado because of racism. Because in 1942, my father, several of his brothers and sisters fled California in the wake of Executive Order 9066, and they ended up here in Colorado. Although I was not raised in Colorado, I spent a lot of time here because of all those relatives, and ultimately decided to make my home here. And I wanted to mention that only because, despite perhaps having some sort of historical cause to distrust government, I've chosen to dedicate my life to government. And I've seen just how much good we can do when we have leaders like Mr. Kellner, like Chief Wilson, who are really dedicated to justice, justice that is colorblind, justice for all, really. And so I'm really proud to be part of that effort, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all. I'm going to talk just a little bit about some of the statutes in a little bit more detail that Chief Wilson mentioned briefly. So I'm going to share my screen for that purpose. So I just want to remind everybody that the folks participating in this call, Chief Wilson, Mr. Kellner, myself, we all work in the executive branch of government. That means that we really don't have the power to make laws, and we don't have the power to interpret laws. Really, we are here to enforce the law. And I know that some of the chats and some of the questions that have come up have concerned whether there's a way to change legislation or improve legislation such that hate crimes can be more effectively prosecuted. And we're certainly going to talk about that, but it is important to remember that we have limits to our own power in that we are limited to the laws that the legislature chooses to pass and that the judicial branch chooses to interpret. So again, I don't mean to get too basic with everybody with basic civics, but the legislative branch makes the laws, the judicial branch interprets the laws, and we enforce them. And so we are limited in that sense. There are two specific bias-motivated crimes contained in the Colorado Revised Statutes. These are both very broad statutes that cover a wide range of conduct. I should mention that there are many, many more crimes in the state of Colorado that are motivated in part or perhaps even in whole by racist views, but we are limited sometimes in terms of the evidence we actually have to connect a particular crime to racial, ethnic, gender, or other forms of discrimination and bias. But
Hey,
these are
Brian?
the two specific crimes we have. Yes.
Not seeing your screen, if you could try
Oh,
to
dear.
share that again.
Okay. Try that again. It does say that I am screen sharing. Can no one see that?
You can see it now. Go ahead and just put it in presentation mode. I think we're good
Okay.
to go.
Yep. I will.
Thanks, Brian.
Yep. Sorry about that. Okay. Are we good? Can we see? Everybody see it?
Yes, sir.
Very good. All right. So these are two relatively broad statutes that I said, like I mentioned, that cover a pretty wide range of conduct. The first is bias-motivated harassment. Now, harassment is normally a Class 3 misdemeanor, which is a relatively less serious crime in the state of Colorado. It typically only carries up to a 6-month jail sentence. However, if we can connect that act of harassment to a bias-motivated or bias-related behavior, then it goes up to being a Class 1 misdemeanor, and the jail sentence, potential jail sentence, becomes much higher. It gets all the way up to 18 months, or in some cases, even 24 months. This crime requires that the defendant have the intent to harass or intimidate another person because of their membership, their actual or perceived membership in the following sort of groups or classes: their race, their color, their religion, their ancestry, their national origin, their physical or mental disability, or their sexual orientation. I emphasize that this is real or perceived. So in other words, if the offender believes someone to be in one of these protected groups, even if they're ultimately wrong, it is still a bias-motivated crime. Now, it also requires that that motivation to harass or intimidate be connected to an act or acts. And these are the potential acts that are covered as being harassment. Those include striking, shoving, kicking, or otherwise subjecting someone to physical contact. Can be bias-motivated harassment, or directing obscene language or making an obscene gesture to or at another person, following a person in or about a public place for no legitimate reason, or, and this is a long statute, but it's essentially communicating with another person via electronic means in a manner that is intended to harass or threaten bodily injury, or makes an obscene comment, or repeatedly calling someone for no purpose, or making repeated communications of other kinds that invade the privacy of another and interfere in the use of another's home. So perhaps just repeated calls containing derogatory slurs can in itself be a crime if it rises to the level of being harassing and intimidating. Or repeatedly insulting, taunting, or challenging or making communications to another in offensively coarse language in a manner that's likely to provoke a violent or disorderly response. Now, this particular statute is one that we are often called on to make sort of close calls on, in the sense that it is not necessarily illegal for someone to simply use derogatory language to another, unless it rises to a certain level where it is likely to cause or provoke a violent response. I do want to emphasize what both Chief Wilson and Mr. Kellner said, which is that you're not lawyers. The members of the community, by and large, are not lawyers. So you should not be making the call about whether this is necessarily a crime. If you feel frightened, if you are the victim of racist comments or taunts, you should call the police. We may or may not be able to ultimately prosecute it, but certainly we want to know about it. The other bias-motivated crime contained in the Colorado Revised Statutes is the same original information. We need to show that it was done with the intent to intimidate or harass another because of their actual or perceived membership in one of those protected groups. And in connection with that, if they cause bodily injury to another person. Now that is a class 5 felony. So instead of someone facing a jail sentence for that behavior, they face the potential for a prison sentence. Otherwise, normally this behavior would be a class 1 misdemeanor, which again carries up to 18 or 24 months in jail. Instead, it is a class 5 felony, which carries with it all the consequences that can accompany a felony conviction. There's another version of bias motivated crimes as well, which is by words or conduct, knowingly placing another person in fear of imminent lawless action directed at that person or that person's property. And those words or conduct are likely to produce bodily injury to that person or damage to that person's property. So an example of this might be someone seeking to incite violence against someone in a protected group, such as an Asian American, by attempting to direct attention to that individual and saying, hey, let's get that person, or let's assault that person together. That sort of incitement behavior can be in and of itself a bias motivated crime and a felony. I'm sorry, this particular version is a class 1 misdemeanor, but otherwise simply be a class 3 misdemeanor if they just use words as opposed to actually assaulting someone. There's a third version as well, which is knowingly causing damage or destruction of the property of another person. Now, this is typically known as criminal mischief. That is the name of the statute that covers this behavior generally. But if it has a bias motivation, then again, it's a class 1 misdemeanor, which is the most serious form of misdemeanor that we have and carries with it up to 18 months in jail. That would, in most cases, otherwise be either a class 2 or a class 3 misdemeanor. So you can see the legislature has given us some tools to make crimes that would otherwise be relatively low-level offenses in the state of Colorado instead significantly more serious and give us more ability to hold those offenders accountable. And I'm going to turn this back over to Mr. Kellner then for some final comments from the district attorney perspective.
All right, thank you, Brian, for running through these statutes. I think it's really important to emphasize one of those things that Brian said here, and that is, if you feel that you are the victim of one of these crimes, please notify us, because again, we want to be able to be effective in fighting this kind of hatred. And the way to do that is not just prevention and education, but it is catching things before they escalate and escalate to potentially violent or even deadly results. We want to be there to help stop that before it happens. I can tell you just as one last thing, and you can take this down, Brian, from your screen. I just simply tell you folks that we started having this conversation, Harry, Chief Wilson, and I, about doing this community conversation, this town hall, many weeks ago, at least a month ago. Is that right, Harry? Right around there. And that's because everybody on this call wants to be proactive in our community. We want to be proactive about talking about these issues. The tragedy, the murder, the killing in Atlanta, I mean, this horrible event that just occurred illustrates why it's so important for us in our community to stand up for our neighbors, to be there for one another, and say we will not tolerate that hate here. So again, Harry, thank you for having me and Chief Wilson on this important town hall community conversation. Just pass it back to you now, Harry.
There. Well, and thank you so much, DA Kellner, Chief Wilson, Mr. Sugioka, Claudine, and everybody on this call. We really appreciate all of your presence here. Now we are in the Q&A section, so I appreciate all of the questions that everybody's been sending. Please feel free to continue sending those questions, but we have a few questions right now. So, Mr. Kellner, the first question is for you. And that question is, do you know if there will be any legislative changes that will help deter or even prevent hate crimes? Are there going to be, for instance, to make the punishment heavier or stricter rule?
Thanks, Harry. That's a great question. I'm not aware of any legislation out there right now that would propose to increase the penalties for hate crimes. I'm not aware of any legislation at the moment related to criminal justice issues that would really address hate crimes or bias motivated crimes at all. I would say that from experience being a prosecutor, there are a few things I think the legislature could take up to help make our system, our system of laws a little better when it comes to deal with bias motivated crimes. One of those is, you might have remembered during Chief Deputy Sugioka's presentation, there is a bias motivated crime of harassment, right? So that is typically a class 3 misdemeanor, but it rises up to a higher level of class 1 misdemeanor if it's bias motivated. That is not a Victims' Rights Act crime. And for those that don't know, the Victims' Rights Act in the state of Colorado is incredible. It requires that people like the police, people like me in the district attorney's office, that we communicate effectively with victims, that we tell them about what's happening, that we ensure that they have a voice in the process in court, that they are allowed to come in to say to the judge, this is what I want to see happen. It mandates that everybody in our justice system treats victims with dignity and respect. And it has certain reporting requirements, or at least requirements on the DA's office. That kind of crime, that bias motivated harassment, does not fall under the Victims' Rights Act. Now, in my office, we have made a policy that we will treat it that way regardless, but I do think that's a bit of a loophole in terms of legislation. The other thing that I think will be very helpful, there's oftentimes this perception. People say, well, why didn't the prosecutor charge this as a bias motivated crime? Our common sense might tell us it's bias motivated. But as a prosecutor, we have to be able to prove things beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury in court. And the important thing about bias motivated crimes is that you have to be able to prove, of course, that the person, the defendant, took that criminal action because of maybe racial animus, hatred towards a particular group, that it was because of that. And one of the things that the legislature could do is clarify that somebody who commits a crime like that can have more than one reason for doing it. I told you all that we just had a trial here in Arapahoe County Courthouse last week. It was a bias motivated crime trial. And it involved a defendant who was literally beating up a victim while using a racial epithet or using a racial slur. And it was very difficult for the jury to say, well, is it because of the racial animus that he was hitting this person? Or was there another reason as well? And the reality is that people are complex. They do things not just for one reason. And I think the legislature could take that up and say, you know what, we recognize that bias motivated crimes happen in whole or in part because of somebody's bias towards a group. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you so much, Mr. D.A. Kellner. Chief Wilson, the next question is for you. And the question has to do about restoring trust and trust building within the community. There are two parts to this question. And the first part is that how will the Aurora police deal with fear on the community around unwanted escalation that has caused death in the famous case of Christian Hall and Angelo Quinto? And the second question has to do with how will the Aurora police reassure sex workers that they can call the police and not, and be protected as opposed to actually being prosecuted or arrested?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. And so I just want to ensure everyone that since COVID started and since the tragic murders in Atlanta, and I do want to apologize for having a slide that had their names. I was not aware that they had asked to have those names not shared. So I do apologize in that and for my ignorance in that, and I hope everyone accepts my apology. The other thing is we have increased patrols outside and around AAPI businesses, organizations, and places of worship. And we're really just trying to get out of our cars and be visible and talk to individuals and try to just know that we're here to help them and that we're someone that they can call. And I know that escalation is very scary. And so that's why we've got the increased patrols, so that people know that we're very visible, and so we can deter that type of escalation from happening. And as far as comes to sex workers, we have, Innocence Task Force. We have partners in the FBI. We have these types of things set up to help people that find themselves caught in that prostitution or sex working environment, and so that we can, get them through the court system, whether we help them relocate, whether we help them with anything that they may be facing. Our victim advocates work very, very well, and also work very well with the judicial system to say, hey, we have someone we need to protect, and we can get them into safe spaces. I'm not sure if Mr. Kellner wants to talk about witness protection programming or anything like that, or victim witness protection programs, but we know the fear's out there, but we've got to, I'm imploring everyone, we need to know this is happening, and then we can set up, off-duty officers at certain locations, or like I said, relocate victims and witnesses if that's necessary. We were just at the vaccination center this last week, and officers were there around the clock. And if you call us, we're going to come, and we're going to try and do the best we can to make you feel safe.
Thank you, Chief Wilson. The next two questions are for Chief Deputy Brian Sugioka. The first question is, since intent is so hard to prove in criminal cases, how can we present information relevant to the bias crime statute? Is it enough if the assailant yells racial slur? Is it enough that the assailant single out one type of person from a crowd?
Well, that's a very good question, and it really does go to the core of the work we do as prosecutors, frankly, in terms of the evidence that we look at. Like Mr. Kellner said, it's somewhat unusual to find a crime that really has only one motivation, right? There's usually a primary motivation plus a number of secondary ones. But certainly statements by the offender, either during or before or after the crime, are often very, very helpful to us, of course. I'm aware of a couple of cases where social media posts by that individual have helped quite a bit, because we were able to sort of establish a pattern of hatred towards one group or another. But that's typically the best source of information, is things that the offender may have said during the course of the crime, or before or after. And I just want to reiterate also what Mr. Kellner said, which is that there are a number of crimes we have where we suspect there was some sort of bias motivated or bias motivation, but we don't want to necessarily set ourselves up to try to prove something like that if we don't have the evidence to do so. For example, I personally prosecuted an attempted murder case where a couple of Caucasian individuals shot and almost killed an African American, and we found out after the fact that these defendants did in fact have some racial supremacist type leanings, but ultimately the crime itself was a robbery. And so we ultimately prosecuted it as a robbery and an attempted murder, because those are much more highly serious crimes in terms of the potential penalty that we can get than just the bias motivator. So, but to answer your question, yes, those sorts of statements are typically very helpful, but we look at the totality of the behavior to see if we can make a case for a bias motivated crime.
Thank you for that. And the second question is, are there federal laws in progress to protect Asian Americans community? It appears that Section 18(9)(121) and 111 are general laws and not Asian American specific laws. How can we be proactive and not reactive?
So I can tell you that outside of the realm of state law and certain municipal ordinances that individual cities and municipalities have, there is a whole universe of federal law that governs deprivation of civil rights, right, for individuals who have been targeted by virtue of their membership in a protected class. I don't pretend to be an expert on that. I am a state level prosecutor. Actually, we did, an individual from the U.S. Attorney's Office did reach out to us, reach out to Mr. Kellner recently, and it wasn't in time to be involved in this particular discussion, but they've certainly expressed an interest in being involved in the future, they being the U.S. Attorney's Office, because they're really the experts in federal law. I'm aware generally that there are some discussions in the Congress about enhancing hate crimes legislation, But to be candid, I am not familiar with the details of that legislation right now.
Hey, real quick, let me jump in there. I think it's important that everybody knows that my office, we work hand in hand with the U.S. Attorney's Office, oftentimes on all kinds of crimes, and it can include bias-motivated crimes because there are some very stringent statutes on the federal side. And oftentimes when we have a case that it could go to federal court or it could go to state court, we have that discussion between the U.S. Attorney's Office and my office as to which of us has the best case to be able to prove and which of us can hold that offender most accountable. And so our goal is always to seek justice for the victim and to try and make them as whole as we possibly can. So to the extent there's any concern that we're entirely separate out here, I will tell you that we're all working together for the same reason to try and get the same goal, and that's justice.
And Mr. Kellner, the next question is for you as well. Are there mediation or restorative justice options?
Yes, actually. So the bias motivated crime statute actually specifically directs a judge on a first-time offender to consider things like useful public service. So basically community service for educational purposes for that person who might have been convicted of a bias motivated crime. And then it also directs the judge to consider restorative justice. And that is only if the victim wants that. Restorative justice is never something a judge can tell you as a victim you have to do. You are really in the driver's seat if that is an option. And really what that means is that we have professionals, some of them are from my own office, who really try to set up a dialogue between the offender and the victim, again, if the victim wants it, so that that offender hears directly about the harm they cause, not just to them, but maybe to their family and community, and to really understand the impact that it has and to hopefully deter that kind of conduct in the future. And really as part of restorative justice for that offender to make amends to the victim.
Thank you. Chief Wilson, the next question is for you, and I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit because it's a bit of a long question. The hard part about reporting hate crime is that it's hard to collect evidence. Majority of the cases that I had are someone just shouting, "Go back to your country," as they pass by. Hate crimes at any point should not be tolerated, but I just don't know if there is a better options that can be suggested on reporting minor, in quotation, hate crimes. Is there, what is your answer to that, Chief Wilson?
Well, first off, I appreciate the question, and there is no minor hate crime. And so I think we need to break that down in our community, that there's no place for hate speech. There's no place for someone being treated poorly. And I'm sorry that that happened to you and your friends. When you talk about evidence, we really just need that phone call, because even if you were to get a license plate number or a description of vehicle, there's so many videos on businesses and other people with cell phones that we can actually go to the area where it occurred, canvas, because maybe somebody saw something but didn't speak up. And once we address them or ask for their help, they may have video that they could share, or a business may have video, and that we can, either get a picture of that vehicle if they drove by and said something, a license plate, or even the picture of the suspect, that I will be more than happy to put out on Facebook saying I'm asking for information on this individual and go through Crime Stoppers, because we need to call these bigots out. We really do. We need to call them out and we need to hold them accountable. And the way we do that is reporting first. And then I also saw a question in the chat about people being fearful about the buddy systems, as far as, having, I think it was elderly Asian females having a buddy that they can walk with. I just saw a sad, unreported crime of someone being yelled at while they were walking in Cherry Creek State Park. So I think that the community can really come together and really tackle this problem. But also, of course, we're always looking for community relations opportunities. And I think Claudine is going to speak to that a little bit. But I think the first thing is report. Let's not let these individuals get away with it, and let us do our job investigating and trying to find video or finding some evidence, even if it's that person's photo, that I can put out to pretty much call them out in our community. We're not going to put up with this.
Thank you, Chief Wilson. And the last questions of the night will go to Claudine, and it's specifically about the buddy system. So following up on Chief Wilson's remark, how can we start an escort system or a buddy system for people that would like one?
Thank you for that question. I know there's a couple community members who have raised that, and I also got an email about it earlier today. So I think it's a great way for our community to come together and really say, we're not going to allow this to happen in our neighborhood. And so I will be reaching out to a few community members. I see a list of names that are on here, so be expecting a phone call from me for a few of you. And we can figure out how we could do this together, because I do think this is going to take a full community approach to address this. This is not just the DA's issue. This is not just the Aurora Police Department's issue. This is really a community-wide issue that we're going to have to address. So I think that's one way that we could approach it, is really get our community to wrap our arms around the situation. The other thing that I am posing to Chief Wilson is to look at all of our officers and all of our city staff as well. We get volunteer hours, and that's something that I'm going to make a proposal to see if we could utilize some of those hours to volunteer in the community for. This is an amazing opportunity to show that we are going to give right back to our community, especially at a time that a number of our community members are feeling very volatile. So we can share back and say, we are here to show support and solidarity and to be an ally to the community. So this is more to come on this.
Great. Thank you so much, Claudine. And with that, we are concluding this town hall. I would like to thank all of the presenters today. All of you did a great job. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and address and talk with our community regarding all of these hate crimes. And for our community members, I just want all of us to always remember that we are strong, we are resilient, we will get through this together with the help of our allies. And I look forward to seeing all of you at our community rally this Saturday, March 27th, 11 a.m. at the State Capitol. Thank you, everybody.